Good morning and welcome to this Euractiv online event, which is kindly supported by PKEE, the Polish Electricity Industry Association. My name is Frédéric Simon. I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv, and I will have the pleasure of moderating today's debate titled Hydrogen, Sun and Wind, which ones can make the best contribution to Europe's energy transformation. Now, the title of today's event is a little bit provocative, I suppose. I don't think anyone is suggesting that hydrogen is in any way better than solar or wind power, but it does highlight an important debate which is taking place right now about the role of the technologies that will be needed to support the transition to an energy system that is going to be largely dominated by renewable energies in the years to come. And this is where, of course, hydrogen can play an important role. Now, to discuss this topic today, I have the pleasure of welcoming a distinguished panel of speakers. But before I introduce them to you, let me first give the floor to Adam Guibourgé, Poland's Under-Secretary of State for Climate and the Environment, who will give us a keynote speech. Mr. Guibourgé, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak this morning. And I believe I do agree with you on the principle that this question is a bit provocative, and I would say that all three technologies are very important in our transition, and they have a very prominent role in our national plans, in the energy policy that we have adopted that highlights the main milestones and investment directions for the transformation of our energy system in Poland until 2040. And we see that all these three technologies have a very significant role to play to ensure the transition. And they're in a way complementary, but they also cannot work on their own. And we need also other technologies to be able to reach our ambitions, our common ambition as the EU to become climate neutral by 2050. And in Poland, we have developed this energy policy, which indicates the main directions for the 2 decades to come. And one of the priorities in our energy policy is to build a new energy system, zero emission energy system, by 2040 of a comparable size to the one that we have today, that is around 40 gigawatt of installed capacity, but that would be fully zero emission, so relying mostly on renewables and also on nuclear. And we see indeed a huge potential in renewables, and we have seen that in the past in Poland, with photovoltaics increasing very significantly over the past year, mainly thanks to investments from households supported by a government program called My Electricity, which has been very successful in mobilizing investment in individual households. And we've seen at the end of last year, we had almost 4 gigawatts of installed PV capacity, about 3/4 of which being in private households, and we intend to continue that direction in the future. Continue to support the development of renewables, but at the same time also encourage the use of this electricity as much as possible to satisfy the needs of these households, and because we see this can have a significant potential to reduce emissions further in heating, for instance, when you combine this with heat pumps, or in transport when it's combined with electric vehicles. So these technologies have even an interest for emission reductions beyond the energy sector, and this is, I think, very important to underline. Wind is another priority in our plans, And we have just recently adopted a national law to support the development of offshore wind energy. We plan to reach almost 6 gigawatt of installed capacity by 2030. In wind, we are currently working on the implementation legislation needed to enable the support scheme for these investments. Obviously, the big advantage of this offshore wind compared to photovoltaic is the greater stability in the production profile of wind energy, which makes the recourse to other backup sources less significant, or energy storage. And hydrogen can be one of these solutions where that can be used to stabilize the work of the grid, to store energy, and that could be used also to further reduce emissions in other sectors. And we see that potential, very significant potential, also in Poland. There are plans by several companies in Poland to develop hydrogen production using excess electricity from renewables to produce hydrogen, and help stabilize the grid by doing so. And we have presented a draft hydrogen strategy until 2030 earlier this year, where we assume we could reach 2 gigawatts of electrolyzers by 2030. Because if hydrogen has to be a solution for the future, we should also be aiming for the solutions where it can be produced with as little emissions as possible, and this is what we are looking for. And at the same time, we should support the development of demand for hydrogen, and we are doing that as well in Poland by supporting, for instance, the acquisition of hydrogen powered buses for public transportation in cities, and developing also charging infrastructure and other application of hydrogen. We see that at the same time as we develop the production capacity in hydrogen with limited emissions, we need to support also demand for hydrogen. That will be also critical in bringing down costs of this technology if there is enough demand for the product. And to that extent, it is highly important that we do not differentiate the different types of hydrogen when we support, for instance, the increased use in hydrogen in long-distance transport or in energy, but rather focus on developing demand for hydrogen while investing in new low-emission sources of hydrogen in order to be able to have access in the future to hydrogen that is that has a very, very low carbon content. And this will be a significant also element in our plans to reach climate neutrality by 2050 as the EU. And we see that these three technologies are of crucial importance, and we have clearly identified these technologies in our own plans in Poland. And we see that there is here, beyond the the technical aspects of managing the electricity system, beyond the environmental aspects of reducing emissions, there is also a very significant economic dimension to these investments, as we see huge opportunities in creating new jobs in the regions most affected by the transformation, also in creating new growth opportunities for companies in Poland and in Europe, as we develop these technologies that we will need not only in Europe, but also all over the world in order to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So this is, in a nutshell, a few words on our perspective on the transition and the use of these three technologies. But I very much look forward to the debate today and wish you a very interesting discussion.
Thanks, Mr. Guéborgé. If you have time for maybe one or two quick follow-up questions.
Sure.
So you just said for 2030 you're looking at developing 2 gigawatts of electrolyzers. That is part of the plans which are currently being discussed, I understand, in Poland for a hydrogen strategy. Can you maybe give us a sense for how much hydrogen by 2030 or 2050 Poland intends to have from electrolyzers on the one hand, and maybe from other sources such as natural gas reforming on the other?
I think that until 2030, we are really looking at the very beginning of the road. Today, we are already a very significant producer of hydrogen. It is mostly using steam reforming, as you said. So it is a technology that is still generating some emissions, and we will need much more capacity, production capacity in low emission hydrogen if we want this technology to be viable in the long run and really helpful to reach our objectives. But at the beginning, in this first decades, it will still be a very limited element in our energy system, and it will gain in importance rather in the next decades, both in terms of quantity and as an energy storage capacity.
Thank you. Maybe one final question. How much of Poland's gas infrastructure needs to be retrofitted to transport hydrogen? Because this is one of the questions which is being debated currently in Brussels. Have you identified the needs and maybe also the costs associated with this, the retrofitting of infrastructure? And how can you ensure that when you do that, this does not create some sort of lock-in into fossil fuels for the years to come?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think indeed it is important when we look at investment in gas to remember on the impact on the short run, on the longer run. To some extent, gas is generating immediate reductions. It can be generating emissions lower by about half or even 60% compared to the equivalent capacity in coal. But we need also to have a plan for the future. So we cannot have too much of a reliance on a source that is still emissive, and this is something we've included in our forecast, trying not to build more capacity in this regard than what is unavoidable, and also have plans how to decarbonize this gas. And this is why we have also introduced in our energy policy the objectives of coming up to 10% of decarbonized gases in the gas network, to look for a solution in the longer run also for that source. A big application that we see of gas, and a sector where the decarbonization is particularly challenging, is the heating sector, where today for district heating facilities we do not really have a solution that would be fully zero emission which we could use at scale across the whole country. You can think obviously of waste or biomass, but I think you would agree with me that the potential of these technologies are rather limited, and if we would rely on these technologies to produce the heat we need in the long run, we may end up having problems with reaching our recycling targets for once, and we may end up having no more forests in Europe. So I think that we need to look also at these constraints and to look for the smallest possible or the best solutions in terms of emissions intensity of these technologies. And this is why we see a potential also in hydrogen as one of the vectors that could help decarbonize the use of gas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guy-Bourget, for the time that you took to give us this keynote and answer those questions. It was really a pleasure to have you with us today. We wish you a very pleasant day. So we can now turn back to our panel discussion. And so let me start by introducing our speakers. Joining us today for this event is Paola Pino from the European Commission's DG Energy, Hildegard Bentley, a German MEP from the CDU party, Barbara Mariani from the European Environmental Bureau, Christian Ruby from trade association Euractiv, and Paweł Poneta, Executive Director at the Toron Group, the Polish electricity company. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us today. We'll start this virtual conference with a series of quick opening statements from the speakers, and then we'll turn to a Q&A panel discussion that I will moderate, also taking a few questions from the audience. To put a question to the panelists, just click on the Ask button on Vimeo and put your question in writing. I think that's all for me for the introduction, so let's start straight away with the introduction statements with Mrs. Paola Pino. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Frederic, for your introduction. Very nice to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you also for the provocation, starting with this debate. And as you may be not surprised, we do not think in the European Commission that there's the best source among these that you noted, but it's really a combination of the various energy sources. We have come up last year with two very important strategies, one on the energy system integration and one on the hydrogen, which were published in July. And ever since, a lot has happened in all EU institutions. We've seen Council conclusions on hydrogen. We've seen the German presidency conclusion on the energy system integration. We've had opinions on both strategies by the European Parliament's Envy Committee, and now we're expecting opinions from the European Parliament in the next months. We also completed a number of public consultations because you know that we are preparing a set of legislation that we're calling Fit for 55, meaning what is it that we need to put in place in terms of regulatory framework to deliver on an increased ambition of at least 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And we see that over the past month, and also on the basis of our public consultations and the discussions with the member states, with the parliament, that views are starting to converge. And clearly, in terms of pathways to decarbonization, we do not see energy efficiency, electrification, and renewable fuels as alternative pathways, but really as complementary options, which will come in different ways and to tackle different challenges. And amidst these pathways, hydrogen has indeed received particular attention, and very rightly so. It has no CO2 emissions at the point of consumption, and it is a very versatile option to help decarbonize a range of sectors, in particular also those who are especially difficult to decarbonize. Now, hydrogen is not an energy source. It cannot be compared with solar, with wind, or with natural gas for that matter. But it can be used in specific applications where we do not really have alternatives, such as some applications in industry, heavy duty or long distance transport applications. But even within these applications, we believe that first and foremost, we need to continue to apply the energy efficiency first principle, ensuring that really we make the most out of our limited resources. And we very often forget to go about it in terms of energy efficiency. Now, it has also become clear that setting targets for renewables and for hydrogen, for that matter, is not sufficient to achieve our targets. We do need a more comprehensive approach, what we like to call a holistic approach, and we need to look at a range of policy options to help the upscaling of renewable and low carbon energy, including on infrastructure, on markets, on digitalization, and research and innovation. Without all of these, it's not enough to just foresee bigger targets for the different renewable energy sources. And that is why we are now preparing this Fit for 55 package, precisely because these issues need to be addressed through different instruments and in different legislative acts. It is a challenge. We remain optimistic. As said, we believe the last months have shown convergence or increasing convergence, at least at political level. We are working out on the details, but the big lines are clear. And it's also clear we do need energy efficiency, we do need more renewables, and we need innovative solutions and make the best out of our research and innovation to really be able to decarbonize our energy system. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks. Let me turn straight away to Hildegard Bentley from the European Parliament.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the floor. And hello to my fellow panelists. I think if wind and solar energy would make the best contribution to EU's energy transformation, we would not have gathered here. While these sources of renewable energy have become an important part of the EU's energy mix, and as the Under-State Secretary of Poland has just stated it, we all do know that power generated from wind and solar energy fluctuates significantly. In addition, the power generated is often not produced where it is consumed. So we need storage and we need transport solutions. Hydrogen can be part of that solution. It can serve as an energy carrier, a fuel and feedstock, and is widely usable in various sectors such as heavy industry, transport, and the building sector, which makes it an important tool on our path to climate neutrality, just as the colleague from the Commission described it. Our efforts should target at green hydrogen from renewable sources in the long term, but we will need low carbon hydrogen for a limited transition period. Low carbon hydrogen projects can facilitate a wider deployment of hydrogen, and what is crucial, contribute to the upscaling of the market for hydrogen. Crucial will be a reliable and safe infrastructure and a level playing field between hydrogen and competing technologies. The Parliament therefore encourages the Commission to revise several legislations and guidelines, such as the Renewable Energy Directive, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, the 10E and the emission trading system, energy taxation, and the energy and environment state aid rules. We also encourage the Commission to introduce comprehensive terminology and European-wide standards and criteria for the certification of hydrogen on the basis of life cycle emission assessments. But I'm not only a member of the Committee on Industry and Environment, I'm also a member of the Committee on Development. And in that role, the international dimension of our decisions is always close to my heart. As regards hydrogen, we'll have to rely to a certain percentage on imports, even if we can unlock our full potential in the European Union. I therefore encourage the Commission and the Member States to engage in their partnerships with third countries to secure and diversify our imports and to enable the exports of our skills, knowledge and technology in order to enable and strengthen sustainable business, but also to contribute to emission reduction outside the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Barbara Barrieri now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting the European Environmental Bureau to this debate. Just very briefly, the European Environmental Bureau is Europe's largest network of environmental citizens organizations, and we represent 160 organizations across 35 countries. And two main elements guide our climate work. One is scientific evidence, and the second is citizens' concerns. So both these elements point to the fact that we are in a climate emergency, and therefore we need to really take measures quickly. Regarding scientific evidence, I would like to mention two main references here. The first one is the IPCC report of global warming 1.5, and the key message here is that 1.5 degree is really the threshold above beyond which climate change impacts will become so impactful that they will really interfere with life as we know it, and with our lifestyle, and really threaten our life conditions. Therefore, this is really the environmental target we need to keep in mind when we make decisions on policies, on instruments, on finance, etc. The second one is the assessment made by the UN Environment Programme on global emissions gap, which keeps telling us that emissions are growing even during the COVID economic crisis and associated responses. Emissions have been growing. And it also tells us that if we want to hit the 1.5 degree target, we need to decrease emissions on a global level by almost 8% per year starting now. And with these figures in mind, it has been assessed that for Europe, on the basis of population equity and historical responsibility, such effort corresponds to an emission reduction target of 65% by 2030 and reaching climate neutrality by 2040. So these are some basic figures I think we need to keep in mind when we talk about how to decarbonize our energy system, but also our economy. And just to reply to the question of today's debate, basing on these assumptions, the European Environmental Bureau, together with CAN Europe, has developed an energy modeling scenario called the Paris Agreement Compatible Scenario, launched last year, which shows that we can reach a fully 100% renewable energy grid by 2040. And this study also shows what I'm happy that has already been said by Mrs. Pino, that energy and material efficiency measures to reduce consumption, together with rapid solar and wind increase until 2030, are the cheapest but also the easiest options to scale up renewable energy potential, to double electricity generation to cover increasing demand from industry, transport and buildings, and also for electrolyzers. However, I would like to point out on this, my message is a bit misaligned with the previous speakers. When it comes to hydrogen, the scenario highlights the very limited need for green hydrogen in our transition to neutrality. When I talk about green hydrogen, this is the only hydrogen that is really compatible with the 1.5 degrees. So this is the only hydrogen we think should be promoted, should be looked at when looking at different options to decarbonize the energy grid. So the main takeaways of our study are basically we need to quickly phase out fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas as soon as possible by 2030. We need to support only renewable hydrogen renewable electricity must come mainly from solar and wind, and also there are also other renewable options that can be used, but the main two are solar and wind to cover most of the demand. And the renewable heat, ambient heat, geothermal heat captured by heat pumps combined with district heat networks are the options to decarbonize buildings. While when it comes to hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, we think that this technology should be left only to decarbonize hard to abate emissions in a few industrial sectors, namely those sectors which need which do not have another option, and which need to cover demand for high temperature heat. When it comes to transport, of course, hydrogen can be used for the decarbonization of aviation and shipping, but we would not, we do not think this is a technology for a wider decarbonization of transport. And I don't want to talk about transport right now because there are other issues to be addressed. And definitely this is not an option for buildings because there are most cost-effective and cost-efficient and resource-efficient options to decarbonize buildings. Just a very last point I'd like to raise on two main issues. One is
please, Barbara.
Sorry?
Yeah. No,
just one
to wrap up now very quickly, yes?
Yes, quickly, there is huge potential in regions in transition, and this has already been pointed out by our Polish speaker, and there is an unprecedented amount of finance to start this economic and societal transformation right now, the recovery plan, but also the MFF. So there are opportunities to embark on this right now. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Barbara. You're welcome, of course, to raise a number of these topics later on during the Q&A debate. Let me now turn to Christian Ruby from Euractiv.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with what Paula said. It's nice to have these provocative questions sometimes because it sort of focuses the thinking. The first thing I thought of when I saw this title was it's like moule frit. You can't really do moule without frit, or you need both. So that's also the Euractiv approach to the whole question of hydrogen. We need it. There's a matter of proportions that needs to be respected, and indeed the principle of energy efficiency first, of course, needs to guide how much hydrogen we have compared to direct electrification. Our approach in Euractiv is clearly that we need to look at direct electrification first. This is more cost effective, it is more energy effective, and we avoid the energy penalty that comes with hydrogen. That said, there's no doubt that we need massive amounts of hydrogen and we need a significant upscaling. When, however, looking at the whole complex of around Fit for 55, just a few observations here. The first one is that when we look at the build-out needed in the power sector, we're talking about around 500 gigawatts of additional capacity in 10 years. First of all, that raises a number of questions about those facilitating measures or the enabling measures that can bring us there with such an upscaling, permitting, market designs, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Secondly, the question is, when you add so much capacity, what is it going to do to the market, and how are you going to unlock the potential for not least direct electrification? When we look at the impact assessment of the European Commission, we see only 1% increase in the overall share of electricity in the total final energy consumption, and that's in a period where you're going to add another 500 gigawatts, corresponding to almost half of the power system as we know it today. There's an imbalance there that we need to talk about and that we need to analyze better. Looking at hydrogen, I think it's important that we also keep in mind what is it for an energy system that we're going to have in 10 years. In 10 years' time, more than 80% of all electricity production is carbon neutral. Now, do we make a system now that basically closes the door on using this grid system, which is essentially almost clean because the rest of the the last 20% will predominantly be gas by then. So we have essentially a low carbon power system by then. Now, do we close the door on producing hydrogen directly from the grid? That would be a bad idea, because essentially this way of producing hydrogen would also help stabilize the grid. So there needs to be some thought about this, and there needs to be a consistency across the many different pieces of legislation that we're dealing with now, the Fit for 55, the taxonomy, and so on and so forth. And my last point is that when looking at this Fit for 55, we really need to focus on the facilitating measures. Without a radical shift in the permitting regimes, we cannot do it. It's just not possible to build that much if all the nation states, all the municipalities, everybody has a right to cancel projects or delay projects. This kind of build out will be very challenging.
Thanks, Christian Ruby, for raising those issues. We'll certainly have a discussion about that later on in the debate. To close now the initial round of introductory speeches, let me turn now to Pavel Panetta from the Torun Group.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me here to this very interesting discussion. As per Polish perspective, European Union is currently reviewing the energy legislation, including the Renewable Energy Directive, and will come up with very concrete proposals early this year. I think that's a very good opportunity here to discuss the development of renewable energy, wind and photovoltaics, including support from hydrogen technologies that can ensure the very successful energy transition across Europe, taking into account the very ambitious goals that was stated. In Poland, from the perspective of Polish Electricity Association, we think that this development should be based on three pillars. The first pillar is related with the integration of renewable energy sources that must be done through the investments in grid, especially grids at the distribution operator system level. It's because this is where the biggest number of small and medium scale installations are being connected to. Just to show you an example, in 2020, to Tauron's distribution operator network grid, we connected around 100,000 micro installations with the total capacity of about 700 megawatts. It's just in 1 year. This grid must be capable, flexible, and smart enough to cope with these new conditions. Taking this number of micro-scale renewable energy sources, taking into account the weather conditions. Second of all, we think that second pillar is related with the administrative and financial support for the RES renewable energy sources development projects that must stimulate this sector in Europe. It's important to mention that we think that the access to this support must be equal for all kind of entities, small and medium enterprises, as well as big entities, large entities like European utilities. Why? Large-scale utilities, they are capable to deliver quicker and bigger projects. Just another example from our perspective, in Tauron, we have a plan to deliver 900 megawatts in wind and 300 megawatts in photovoltaics up to 2025. Tauron also plans to engage in another offshore project, offshore projects in Baltic Sea. And last but not least, third pillar is related with the hydrogen development, taking into account the research and innovation activities at the national and European level, taking into account technology transfer. The program Horizon Europe can really help in this field, but also should support the development of and deployment of green hydrogen technologies. As we know, for example, in Tauron, that these kind of projects, especially in the large scale, are let's say economically not viable at the moment. We also promote in Poland the Polish perspective that we should try to be neutral when it comes to technologies, and not to promote any kind of technologies. We should take into account all the time the CO2 emissions and energy efficiency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paweł Poneta. I understand Hildegard Bentley has to leave a bit earlier, so maybe I'll turn to you, Hildegard, for the opening question. We heard during the opening keynote and the presentations about the huge challenge that there is to decarbonize and to ramp up renewable production. In Poland, it's a massive undertaking because they're phasing out an energy system which is almost entirely dependent on coal. So let us now maybe for a minute turn to Germany, because the challenge there is also enormous. The country is just about to finish phasing out nuclear power that was promised just 10 years ago after Fukushima, and that is expected to close in 2022. And the country has also agreed on a phase-out strategy for coal. So how big is the challenge from your perspective? And I'm thinking as well, in terms of the elections, which are coming up later this year, what kind of ideas will the CDU party that you're a member of will put forward? What are the discussions currently taking place within your political family?
Well, many discussions are taking place currently. It's a hard time, but of course we are looking to the future, and we have to, of course, provide a vision. And as you said, the latest target date for the fossil fuel phase out in Germany is 2038. End of 2022, the last of 6 remaining nuclear power plants will leave the grid. At the same time, the coalition agreement contains the commitment to 65% renewable energy in 2030 and a reduction of coal-fired power generation in line with the sectoral targets. This is why we and also mainly CDU, we have established a pretty ambitious German hydrogen strategy, and we have also put quite a good amount of financial means behind it, also under the recovery facility. But the problem is that we need to create much more. We need to create much more renewable energy, and this is, as it was mentioned, also by the colleagues who are observing the grids. It's not an easy task, and it's also not easy because we have very limited space in Germany. So our potential to increase renewable energy is really limited. And also to have it at the place where we need it. This is why we are in CDU a bit more generous regarding also low carbon energy. And I would also underline what the colleagues have said regarding the use of the grids. I'm also coming from Berlin. Over 60% of the houses are on the gas grid. And it's possible to plant 20% of hydrogen into the heating grid. So we have to measure what is the most important to us. And if you want to decrease CO2 emissions very fast, and if you want to scale up the market for hydrogen, we are persuaded that we need to have a transition period, a clear, limited transition period, in which we deal still with gas. We also use the infrastructure for gas, and we need a lot of support measures to build up the infrastructure, to build up the first plants, to increase demand for hydrogen. So this will be a very crucial phase this next 9 years, which will pass very fast. It's a very short time regarding investments. So we have to do a little bit of everything, and we should not exclude from the beginning technologies and possibilities also in transport. If I would like to refer to Madame Mariani, we would not exclude currently hydrogen also from transport. Also, we have to look at aviation, at the maritime sector. So we also have to look at Asia, where hydrogen is very much used, and we should not cut off ourselves from this kind of solutions. So we have a very broad approach to hydrogen, and as we have seen in the last elections, where our liberal colleagues have fully embraced this broad approach to hydrogen in our southern federal state, Baden-Württemberg, where the car industry is located, they were rewarded by having this, promoting this broad approach and being very positive about hydrogen. So we put a lot of hope into these new technologies, since we face this double challenge, going without nuclear, going without coal. So for us, hydrogen is really a very, and have limited capacity for renewables. We have to really invest and promote hydrogen now. And also what I said, nobody was referring to that, we have to import hydrogen. And also the German government is fostering energy partnerships. We can see in Saudi Arabia, we have countries who turn from fossil fuel providers, they turn into hydrogen producers. And I think we should also use this opportunity to diversify our imports, because at least in Germany, we will continue to rely on them.
Thank you, Mrs. Bentelet. Let me turn now to Paula Pino. A question for you. The European Commission, as you said in your initial statement, has clearly prioritized renewables in its hydrogen strategy. But how can we make sure that enough renewables will be made available for hydrogen production, given the fact that a lot more will be needed for direct electrification as well? So, in other words, have you quantified this in terms of your objectives for 2030 in the hydrogen strategy?
Thank you. Thank you, Frederick. Well, and indeed, and I have to emphasize here that from the Commission's perspective, our main objective and the vision is really to develop renewable hydrogen. But we do acknowledge that in order to speed up the decarbonization of existing hydrogen production and to allow for a rapid upscaling, we will also need low carbon hydrogen in the transition. So just to clarify this, then in terms of the needs, and you're absolutely right, the electricity needs will increase significantly, and therefore this would need to also be matched with a much higher penetration of renewable energy sources into the grid. We have set up in the hydrogen strategy a target, an EU target for renewable electrolyzers of 40 gigawatt by 2030. We are encouraged by looking already at what member states are putting into place. And I have to say that this would have been thought of only a few years ago. But already when you look into the national energy and climate plans, where this is being noticed, but also now in dedicated hydrogen strategies, and the Secretary Gilles Bourget just mentioned it also from Poland, we are seeing an increasing number of EU member member states who do foresee the production of hydrogen and renewable hydrogen. We see that according to the latest information we have, more EU member states have pledged to more than 25 gigawatt of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers by 2030. So it is reassuring. And we are, of course, also counting with a bigger share of renewable energy in the final energy consumption. That is why we're also proposing to further increase the targets. You know that we have a current target for 2030, which was of at least 32.5% of the share of renewables in the final energy consumption. We believe that in order to deliver on the 55 reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, we would have to go up to 38 to 40% of share of renewables in the final energy consumption. But that is why really we are also putting the signals both on the regulatory front, but also in terms of investments that could trigger that additional capacity and that are prone to trigger that additional capacity that will indeed be needed.
Thanks, Paolo Pino. Let me turn to Christian Ruby now. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure now being exerted on the electricity industry to deliver on these very ambitious renewables target that are needed to deliver not just green hydrogen, but for direct electrification as well. How can the industry now rise to this challenge? And what are the main bottlenecks that you've identified?
Well, I think there's pressure. Frankly, on everybody, because it's the climate challenge is not just one of the electricity industry. It's a societal challenge, and I would actually say, when I look at what needs to be done now, there's no doubt that there's a lot of pressure on us. But for me, the biggest pressure is really on politicians, on policymakers, and on regulators to align the rules so that you can unleash the forces of the industry. Because once those frameworks are there and the ability to act is there, there's no doubt that the industry will accelerate. The money is there. Private investors are very keen to invest in all this, and the will and the competence is there in the industry. It's really a matter of getting the business cases right and removing the barriers that we're facing. So what are those barriers? Well, I want to echo what was said by our Taiwan colleague. I think we really are not talking enough about distribution grids. Distribution grids needed or used to be, the last mile in a one-way street to the customer. Today, they're rapidly moving in to become the center of the new energy system because we have so many decentralized installations. I think it was very fascinating to hear what Taiwan was facing in very practical terms, 100,000 installations in 1 year. And I can tell you that over the next 10 years, 70% of those 500 gigawatts will be installed and connected at distribution level. There is a huge need for us to modernize those grids. Around a third of them are more than 40 years old. That figure is going to be 50% by 2030. So we need to modernize, we need to digitize, and we need to massively invest here. Now, this is a regulated business. That means we need to have the green light of the regulator to do it. So we need to modernize the tariff systems, and we need to make sure that regulators give DSOs the space to invest and react to those many things that are going on in the market. This is a critical thing to look at if we want to get this right. The other thing I want to repeat is about the permitting. No matter where you look in Europe, you're seeing permitting issues. We're talking 5, 6, 7 years of delays to permits. And you can do the math yourself. We're in 2021 now. We want to have half a new energy system by 2030, right? If we wait 6 years for all the permits, we're nowhere by 2030. So we need politicians to make that consequential change to the permitting regimes. Otherwise, there is an immediate risk over those political ambitions. So those would be the two main things I would highlight here.
Christian Ruby, there's recovery plans now which are being put together at the national level. How would you recommend national governments, which are currently drawing up those plans, to prioritize in those? I understand maybe distribution grids, in your view, should be prioritized when drawing up these plans?
Absolutely, and we can see that this is one element that's pretty much totally overlooked in the 10E regulation. Fair enough, we're talking trans-border or cross-border installations, but is cross-border in this energy transition really, line from country A to country B, or is it a matter of making sure that the green transition becomes a cross-border success? I think we need to expand our mindset a little bit with regard to what we mean with cross-border. So yes, absolutely, make sure that those recovery plans help the necessary reinforcements and modernizations of the distribution grids of Europe. A second point I'll point to is infrastructure for e-mobility. Again, here's something that's obviously cross-border, but it's not necessarily a line from A to B. It is something that we need all of us in all countries to have if we want to have 40 to 70 million electric cars on the roads by 2030. So here's another obvious area for countries to prioritize to make sure that we get that rollout. We're talking, millions of charging points by 2025, and we're at some 200,000 today. So you can see this is another exponential scale up that we need to get right, not only in the interest of the citizens or the electricity industry, certainly also in the interest of the car industry, which provides some 12 or 14 million jobs in Europe. So we really need to think of this in broader societal terms and make sure that we get a holistic view at what we're doing.
Thank you, Christian Ruby. Hildegard Bentley, I see you're still there, and you were nodding when Christian Ruby mentioned the need to invest heavily in distribution grids. Is that something that you agree on? And maybe, again, in view of the political renewal, which is being prepared in Germany, have you got plans to develop further those? I mean, Germany hasn't been really the best pupil in the class, especially when it comes to cross-border infrastructure.
Yes. Yeah, I was nodding because it's very obvious, and we have seen in the United States where old grids and not enough investments into infrastructure have led. So I think that's a very and we also have problems with our digital grids and infrastructure. So it's really its alarm clock is ringing, and please be assured that also in my party that we will bring this to paper and we will run on this kind of program, because we need really very important investments into infrastructure. It was mentioned in the infrastructure of charging points. I think Germany is not bad. I know at least for hydrogen we have most of the charging points are in Germany, but also the grid has had instabilities also, and so it's obvious. And I think this also discussion today and the recommendations by our colleagues who are in charge of the grids and also the connecting of many micro installations, because this is also something which is taking up now, and this is certainly also wanted by the citizens, which are represented by Madame Mariani. We are encouraging the citizens to put solar panels on their roofs. So, but we also have to guarantee that they are connected and that they do not destabilize our grids. So this point is taken up. Be assured. And I was listening because it's so interesting, but now I have to leave. But I took this up, and I will bring this also into our programs and also pay attention that this will be considered in our recovery plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hildegard Bentley. And Barbara Mariani, Hildegard mentioned citizens and their role in accepting the deployment of new wind farms, of new power lines. It's not always easy to convince local population to accept those. It has been a problem, for example, in Germany. What do you think can be the role of associations, citizens associations like yours, in helping to further the deployment of renewables? Because, as you said, there's an emergency to act, and waiting 6, 7, or 8 years for new infrastructure to be put in place is probably not something we can afford.
Yes, thank you, Frederick. It's absolutely key to involve citizens in energy infrastructure planning, and we have been advocating for this for a long time. And also, our Paris Agreement compatible energy modeling scenario has been built together with national environmental associations. There are a few rules to respect if we want this process to work. First of all, citizens must be engaged timely and not at the very last minute. So they must feel that they are really an important player in energy infrastructure planning and design. They need to be informed, well informed, and they need to have the right opportunities to express their views and to give voice to their concerns. This can work, but clearly what is most required is national governments' participation, because it is at national level that this process needs to be very well managed and guided. Otherwise, some projects will always find opposition if citizens have not been engaged, as I said, through a very structured and regular dialogue through their own governments. So the big obstacle is national governments, and we are advocating for this to improve in many current legislation that are being negotiated, like the climate law, like we have done this in the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and we are pushing for this in the National Recovery Plan. Governments need to consult their citizens timely, they need to inform them, they need to take into account their concerns, otherwise we cannot face this challenge together. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara Mariani. Let me turn to Pavel Panetta, maybe from for a national perspective there. We saw that citizens can sometimes be an obstacle to the deployment of new renewables. They can also help it when they install solar panels, for example, on their roof. How is that being managed in Poland? How do you manage that as an electricity group yourself? And maybe more generally speaking, what do you see as the key bottlenecks for the deployment of more renewable energies in Poland?
As I especially in the as I already mentioned, cases related to the distribution operator system, especially and at the low voltage and middle voltage grids. This is a key for the moment. The low voltage grids in general in Europe for the decades was underinvested, and we have no or almost no smartness, I would say, in this field, and almost no flexibility. So it's very important, first of all, to introduce the flexibility aspects to this grid. I would say there is a need for a quick deployment of storage mechanisms, and not only battery storage, but also different kind of storage, which we should bring to the discussion. Also, hydrogen in this field. There are different concepts in this subject. Yeah, that's a key aspect in this field. I would say this is the most important when it comes to this this question.
Okay, staying with you for just for one more question. As you know, the European Commission is preparing a package of legislation in June. So the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, for example, is up for revision. How do you think these two directives could be reformed to help accelerate the deployment of renewables?
I would say there are different parts of that. There will be, of course, financial resources that will come up together with this administrative and the financial support will come up together with that. We have a modernization fund that is coming up together, and yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Paula Pino, let me return to you. We've heard from the different speakers today about the bottlenecks that they see standing in the way of the acceleration of the deployment of renewables, whether it's infrastructure, grids, or the generation capacity in itself. What is the European Commission's view on this so far? I guess you've been doing quite a bit of analysis now in preparation of the Fit for 55 package. So what are the main bottlenecks that you've identified standing in the way of the deployment of renewables?
Thank you, Frédéric. Well, we started indeed already, and actually some of it is already on the table, and I'm referring in particular to the 10E regulation, where we have notably in the revision of the 10E, which we put forward at the end of last year and is now subject to co-decision, we have included in the revision 2 new infrastructure categories. Dedicated hydrogen pipelines and large-scale electrolyzers. So really this in an attempt to reflect the needs that we will have for hydrogen and electrolyzers. In this same context, we also are proposing to task the European networks of transmission system operators, both for electricity and gas, to work together and to start preparations for the future planning and development of a hydrogen pipeline backbone and large-scale electrolyzers. So this in terms of already what we have tried to tackle within the 10E. And on this, I also would like to pick up Christian's point, where Christian indicated that not enough has been done when it comes to distribution. Well, this is something that we do intend to tackle, and we do see the need to tackle in another of the legislative proposals that will be put forward later this year, not directly as part of the Fit for 55 in June, but the legislative framework for decarbonized gases and hydrogen. And by the way, the public consultation on this one is ongoing, is now open, and I encourage all of you who are interested to contribute to that public consultation. And there, the idea is really to also target the market rules and make sure that we do design a competitive market for decarbonized gases and hydrogen, and precisely to make it possible for such renewable and low carbon gases to enter the market, to have access to distribution. So that's another set of challenges that we will tackle through this legal proposal later in the year. And now through the Renewables Directive, for instance, one of the aspects we are looking into is to look for a comprehensive terminology and certification of low carbon and renewable fuels, as actually has also been asked for or referred to by MEP Bentele in her initial introduction. So just to give you some examples of the issues that we are tackling or have already tackled in the case of the 10E regulation, where we've put it forward, and now it's being negotiated with both the European Parliament and the Council.
Thanks, Paolo Pino. Let me turn to you, maybe, Christian Ruby, for a quick comment on the 10E regulation, which is being reviewed now. This is about energy infrastructure, for those who don't know 10E. Are there, in your view, Christian Ruby, some no-regret options there when it comes to the development of hydrogen infrastructure, whether we're talking about the retrofitting of gas pipelines for transporting hydrogen, or for storing hydrogen, or indeed electrolyzers for producing it?
Well, let me start by saying that when I referred to distribution grids, I was really talking about electricity grids. We need to remember that a lot of the hydrogen will be based on electricity, and on top of that comes those massive investments in renewables that will also be carried via the electricity grids. So when I talk about the need for investments in distribution grids, it's really electricity grids I'm talking about. Now, back to your question about the 10E and what about the hydrogen component there, and what about the electrolyzers. I think this is all stuff that we, by and large, welcome in Euractiv. I think it was important to say that what we really felt was needed with the 10E was that we take a significant shift towards focusing on electricity infrastructure. I think that move has been made by the Commission, and that's very welcome, because it is really going to be the center of the new energy system, and that's why we need to focus our efforts there. That said, yes, it's fine to have investments in some targeted, limited, I would say, hydrogen corridors, because we need to reflect the fact that even by 2050, hydrogen will come, account for some 10% maximum of total final energy consumption. So we really need to make sure that the infrastructures we're building today are fit for that long-term future, and that we don't overbuild in areas where we won't need it. Electrolyzers, expanding the category of infrastructure investments to cover that, fine. But again, what we see missing is the focus on how to modernize Europe's distribution grids, electric distribution grids. And I'm not sure that the proposals that will come later this year, as Paula mentioned, would be fit to address those issues. Those are about the frameworks at national level, not least the tariff frameworks, and it's about ensuring a different type of cooperation with the regulators. This will be really critical. But we also should look, in my view, to the structural funds, and make sure that as part of the recovery packages, as part of the structural fund spending, that we really make sure that we support the renewal and modernization of the European electricity grids.
Thank you. Maybe a quick reaction on this from you, Pavel Panetta, about the revision of infrastructure guidelines at European level. How do you expect this to support the deployment of renewables and hydrogen in Poland?
Just to mention that I fully agree on what Christian just mentioned. When it comes to hydrogen, it's a very high topic at the moment. We have several strategies. The one from the European one, the German, and the Polish that came up the last year. I think that there are three key subjects when it comes to the hydrogen development within the European Union. It's the first and the important one is the financial support for projects that is related with the green hydrogen, as we have if we approved in several profitability studies that was made, feasibility study that was made here in Tauron, shows that this kind of projects shows negative economical analysis, especially in capex, but also in opex That's why it really needs strong support from different funds. Additionally, there is a strong need for regulations in this field. It's really expected. Market really expects the EU hydrogen directive on that can be later on transferred on national law on the subjects that will cover the different aspects like safety and many other things. And then last but not least, there is the strong need to develop the technologies at the European level. There is a strong need for a technology transfer among member states in this field. So there must be common research and innovation projects that can support all these aspects.
Right, thank you very much, Pavel. Maybe before we close, I will ask each one of you to summarize in a few sentences the main message that you would like our audience today to take away with them. And maybe, since you just had the floor now, Pavel Panetta, we can start with you. What would be your main takeaway message for today?
There are several points that I would like to say, but the key is the key subject here is are the grids, especially at the DSO level. Low and medium voltage are very important these days when it comes to renewable energy sources development. There is a key aspect related to funds, especially new technologies, and this access should be equal for different kind of entities, large scale, but small scale and large scale entities. We should look very closely to hydrogen technologies, but not only on green one. We should look much more on CO2 emissions and effectiveness when it comes to investment, rather than promoting specific technology. So we should be neutral when it comes to the technology that is selected. Namely, we should be color blind, but we should rather look at the CO2 emissions related and the effectiveness of this kind of projects. So these are my messages.
Thank you, Christian Ruby. Just one takeaway message from your side.
Yes, let's not forget that the single biggest thing that needs to happen over the next 30 years is direct electrification, upscaling of the electricity system, and increased use of electricity in end-use sectors. It is the single biggest thing that needs to happen, and that needs to stay center in our thinking and our regulation of the energy sector. Second, let's make sure that we build the infrastructure for that purpose now, and we make those investments now. That spells distribution grids for electricity. Third, in order to do this, we need to have a radical shift in the permitting regimes. This is a critical precondition for us to achieve these targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Barbara Mariani, your concluding thoughts.
Yes, just in a nutshell, we think we need to, first of all, reduce our energy and resource use, and this is absolutely key if we want to also reduce our pressure on energy sources, and therefore our main message is trying to put as much effort as possible on in energy and resource efficiency, energy resource consumption reduction. And when it comes to decarbonizing the grid, decarbonizing the system, the energy system, we need to focus on truly renewable sources, meaning only green hydrogen and only for very limited uses, as I said before, and try to use all the opportunities we have today with technologies we already have available that are already quite cost competitive, and we cannot lose time, and we cannot waste time, and we need to do this in this decade. And so we hope that the Fit for 55 package will take all these on board and will enable this radical transformation of the way we produce and consume when it comes to using energy. Thank you very much.
And Paola Pignot, you have the privilege of closing this virtual conference. Your concluding thoughts and main takeaway message for our audience.
Thank you, and I do take away also your input, I would say, on from my side. Well, first, energy efficiency, electrification, renewable fuels, including hydrogen, are not alternative pathways to decarbonization, but are really complementary. This is also why setting higher targets is not sufficient to deliver on decarbonization. And for this reason, we are looking into a range of policy options to help upscaling renewable and low carbon energy, which includes options to support infrastructure, options to support the creation of efficient markets where electricity, gas, fuels, and heating are more closely coupled. Options to digitalize the grid and to unlock flexibility, and options to increase continued research and innovation to bring the new technologies to the market and scale up their use.
Thanks, Paola Pignot. I think this wraps up today's event. Thanks to PKE for supporting it. Thanks as well to our panelists for taking the time to be with us today, as well as to our viewers for following us on Vimeo. Apologies for the technical issues that we had today. We'll hopefully address them the next time. And in case you like the debate, well, you'll be able to view it again in full in a few minutes. The video will be posted on YouTube. Just check our YouTube channel for that. And if you're interested about forthcoming Euractiv events, you're welcome to check our online page, events.euractiv.com, for more detail. So I think that wraps it up for me. So hope to see you again soon. Stay safe and bye for now.